Free. So good morning, everyone out there in internet land. This is Yvonne DeVita from downtown sunny Binghamton. And yes, the sun is actually out today. It's only 50 degrees, but the sun is out. So I can't complain too much, can I? In fact, we even walked the dog already today. But today on Smart Conversations, what we're going to do is talk about women in leadership. And that's something that's very dear to my heart because I believe so many women in leadership don't get the recognition they deserve. But we're going to talk with Mary O'Sullivan, who is a client of Nurturing Big Ideas. And we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 2 of her book, which is The Paradox of Women in Leadership. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I'm very pleased to be here.
So I'm going to tell everybody a little bit more about you before we get going. And I'm going to read directly, folks, from the back of the book. The blurb that is on Mary's book. Mary O'Sullivan has over 30 years experience in the aerospace and defense industry. So everyone, we're not fooling around here. This woman knows what she's talking about. In each of her roles, she acted as a change agent, moving teams and individuals from status quo to new ways of thinking by offering solutions focused on changing behaviors and fostering growth. And today, Mary dedicates herself to helping good leaders get even better through positive behavior change. So, Mary, one of the things there, as I was reading that, and I was remembering the book and writing the book with you, and being your editor and your helpmate there, is that behavior plays a really big role, regardless if you're a woman or a man. Let's talk about that for a minute before we even go into women.
I would love to talk about that because most of the work that I do is regarding behavior. And it really boils down to how people act in the workplace. So often you find that people revert back to high school behavior, cliques, and nastiness that goes on behind people's backs, all of the little annoying things that you experienced growing up in an organization like a school, for instance. Right. Those things seem, for some odd reason, to transfer directly into the workplace. And people forget that they're grown-ups. And what I like to remind people of is that they have families, they have friends, they have relatives, and you have to ask yourself, is this the way you act in front of the people that know you best, like the 250 people that would come to your funeral? Do you treat them like this? So that's always the way that I work with people, because 99% of the problems are behavior related. And I worked with a fantastic mentor at one point, and I was questioning him on how we got some of the people in the company that we ended up with. And he was telling me that there was they had a big upswing and a need for hiring an additional staff because they had won a huge contract for a multi-billion-dollar ship, and they had to bring more people in. And he said, a lot of them slip under the radar and they don't necessarily understand what our values are. And so I said, well, these people are running rampant through the company. What are we going to do about it? And he said, Mary, we can't teach values, but we can teach behavior.
I loved that quote in the book, and that is in the book, everybody.
Yes.
I really love that part of it because you talked throughout the book, Mary, about the idea of behavior, and not just behavior from what we're talking about here. Would you do that in front of your wife, or would you do that at a family gathering? But also behavior as it relates to the bigger world. And again, we'll get to women in paradox because that is important to me. But I really love the chapter on culture.
Yes.
Because that is behavior based also. right? Tell us
Absolutely.
about some of your experiences from the book.
Well, I love talking about behavior because, that's what it's all about. One of the things that I remember distinctly regarding behavior is that we had a brand new facility. It was $2 million, and I was in charge of everything from the development, the design, the implementation, all the ideas for, the walls and the furniture and all of that, the colors. And each one of the chairs, I insisted that we put in ergonomic chairs because people would be sitting in this area for a really long time. And at the time, which had to be at least 20, 25 years ago, the chairs cost $500 a piece.
Wow.
And yes, and can you imagine 2 big rooms full of these chairs, right? Very comfortable, padded seats you could sit in for a whole day and never feel it. So I came into one of these large rooms one day and I found engineers sitting on the desktops with their feet on the chairs. And I was appalled. I mean, this was simply back to behavior. And I honestly, and the guy was not a nasty person. He's just clueless. And I went up to him and I said, Bill, do you put your feet on a $500 chair that your wife just bought? And he was like, oh, no, because it was a work chair. So what did he care? And I said, you can't put your feet on these chairs. They cost $500 a piece. And I'm talking about over 20 years ago, they cost $500. So God knows what they cost today.
Right.
So that's just one example of clueless and just inconsiderate lack of manners behavior. When they walk through the doors of the company, somehow they forget what good behavior is. The other thing I found is a lot of just plain old lack of courtesy.
Yeah, well, I agree, but this kind of segues into the whole paradox of women in leadership in a way, because generally speaking, you wouldn't find a woman who would be doing that, because for your perspective, especially, I mean, here you were granted the right to these $500 chairs, and you did it precisely to make everyone's life a little easier. So we go back to this behavior thing, and you were thinking of other people, whereas this guy, who wasn't necessarily a bad person, he just was thinking, I'm just going to sit here and put my feet on the chair. But when we go to chapter 2, which is Women in Paradox, everyone, the paradox of women in leadership, rather. I love the way you started it, Mary. I love this first sentence, feeling like no matter what you do as a woman, leadership opportunities pass you by. I think a lot of women feel that way. And if they do, what should they do, Mary?
Well, it's interesting. And I do talk about that issue in this chapter, as well as other chapters that I've addressed women's issues in. And one of the biggest issues that we have as women is that we want to be really diligent and really hard workers. And we think that if we stay late and we take on extra work and we don't overlook any details and we don't get upset if somebody else claims credit for your work, we think that being nice and being a hard worker is going to move us up. But you know what happens? And I'm working with people right now, women right now, that are in that trap, because the bottom line is they cannot delegate. They do not, you basically do not have to do everything yourself. You can find other people to help you or advise you or guide you or whatever. You can hire a coach. You can do so many different things. And if you're tied to work, you can delegate other things like housekeeping, grocery shopping,
Right.
you know, drag out those wedding gifts, the crock pot, the pressure cooker. How long have those things been in your cabinets, maybe uneven opened for 5 years?
Right.
So
Right.
we forget that we do have ways around being so overwhelmed, but we don't take advantage of them. The truth of the matter is that regardless of how hard you work at a job, other than finding some way to put yourself in the spotlight, which is not bad, by the way, you're only going to be perceived as a really hard worker. And, oh, well, let's give that to Mary because we know she'll get it done.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you talked in the book about how women, we are uniquely raised or taught that we need to take the responsibility to get it done.
Right.
And asking for help makes us weak. And so women think asking for help is a bad thing when it's not.
Exactly. There's no shame in asking for help.
Well, plus in a business setting, Mary, isn't that exactly what a leader would do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They find people to take some of the work off their shoulders, because if they're buried in details, and there are a lot of people who get into leadership positions that are like that, particularly engineers. Nothing against engineers, I love them dearly, but they are very detail oriented. And if you get a leader who's so buried in the nitnoids of solving an algebraic algorithm problem, he's not going to be able to do his job. And so, you know, that's a problem, and people complain and grumble about it. But women have not figured out that they can go to their boss and say, listen, if you put one more thing on my plate, nothing is going to get done effectively. Now, I actually had a conversation like that with my boss, and he looked up from his work and said, Mary, in this job, you're never done.
Well,
so I took that as, you know what? At 6 o'clock, I'm out of here. I'm not staying 1 second later. And that was already an hour over. If I took lunch, I would have to work till 6 to get everything kind of wrapped up for the day before I could get out of there.
Yeah. And don't some women, they really put themselves into the role and into the position, and they like it so much, they get caught up in that, well, I can do this because I'm, work is fun. I like it here. So if I have to stay to 7, it's okay. But it's not, because they're going to get taken advantage of.
That's exactly what happens. And I've heard that from many, many women on the job when I was actually employed at these large companies, in that they complained that they didn't get listened to, that their ideas were put to the side, that no matter how much work they did, they always got more on top of it because they were the worker bees. That's the way they were perceived. And I've seen it happen where women get so disgusted that they leave. And that has become a huge problem in industry. They cannot keep good women because women are not being recognized. On the other hand, you have really good women not understanding how to get recognized.
Right.
We also have a socialization of not being what we women consider selfish. So we don't want to just think about ourselves. We want to make sure everybody else is taken care of. So when it's our turn to step up, we maybe defer to somebody else because, well, they haven't really had a chance to give this presentation. I've already given it 4 times. But I can tell you, this just sparked another idea. I had a position as part of my job where I was teaching the business development piece of the program management college at this company that I worked at most recently. And I couldn't make one of the sessions. So I asked a guy who I knew, who I thought was a great guy, if he would take that over for me for that session. And guess what? He kept signing up, and I never got to go back and take that position again.
Yeah.
Because he just put himself in my place. And when I called him on it, he said, well, you asked me to take over. And I said, for one class,
Right.
not for the rest of, and it went on every year, every single year. That was a standard class. So
Well,
he just took the materials. They were canned materials. So, it was sort of like anybody could do it. But
right.
because I had all that experience, that's why I was asked to do it, because I understood the topic really well from soup to nuts. So
yeah,
all he had to do was follow the book. But that's a perfect example of what happens.
Yes, exactly. So another thing that I was thinking of while you were speaking is the story you told about trying to get, this is one of your stories that's in the book, trying to get approved to go to a women's conference. And then the other part of that story is when you got there, I remember you described this one table where no one was stopping. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. That's right. Okay.
You remember.
I was mixing up two different conferences. Yes, very interesting. So I went to a women's conference, several years in a row, and there was a vendor display, so you could kind of shop while you were there. And they had painted glass, and they had jewelry, and they had olive oil tastings, and they had chocolate tastings, and they had a place where you could get your picture imprinted on a cappuccino.
Wow.
They took your picture, and then they embossed it on, when they did the foam, they embossed your picture on the cappuccino. It was pretty neat. I have a picture, and it looks exactly like me. It's just amazing. Anyway, all of those booths were absolutely jam-packed. There was one lonely booth where everybody was just walking on by, and it was the golf booth.
Yes.
And the poor woman who was, I should say, manning it, the poor woman who was standing there at the booth was just kind of looking around like, whoa, everyone's rushing by. And I mean, when the sessions ended, people were scooting by, a million miles an hour to get in line for some of these other things, like the glamour shot, the makeover, shot, all those things. You couldn't get near them, right? There were hundreds of women crowded around, and there sat the poor woman who was trying to sell golf lessons for women, and around her display were quotes from other women that had taken golf lessons. And the one that stood out in my mind was the one that said, I advanced my career 2 years by learning to play golf. And whatever reason there is behind that, women don't like to congregate in teams, I found, for social purposes. So I always ask this question whenever I'm speaking, and when I'm talking about taking golf lessons, I say, men go to the 19th hole after golf, and they sit with people, and they chit chat, and they make connections. And somebody always knows somebody else, especially if you're playing with people from work. If your job has a golf team. So the thing is that, we don't golf that often, but we go to yoga. So I ask people, what happens when you're done with yoga? Do you go down the street for a coffee with the other women in the class, or do you roll up your mat and get out of there as fast as possible? And to a person, they roll up their mat and get out of there as fast as possible.
Yeah. And
so there's no social interaction. There's no networking. There's no reaching across any kind of line to meet other people. We stay in our own circle and we orbit in that very tight little circle out of pure socialization.
Well, the other thing that I think you at least I got from the book with that story was the fact that when women learn to play golf, then they can golf with the men.
Exactly.
Because you work with the men, so you need now to be competing with the men, and the only way to do that is to be in the circle they're in, and it might be golf.
Exactly. And I think that some women have a big hesitation about doing any networking with men.
Yeah.
And then the whole other story there is the fear of networking. And I do talk about that in the book because honestly, in my research, I found that a lot of women think that it's immoral to network only to get information.
Yeah.
So I think there's a great misunderstanding of what the purpose of networking is. What you go to networking for is not really to get, it's to give.
Right.
So you meet people and you find out about them, you ask them about themselves, and people will go on talking for hours about themselves. And then you can offer something that you know that might help that person. So let's say it's a big somebody who rents out big office space and he's having problems with his cleaning crew. So maybe you know somebody who's got a really great cleaning crew because maybe at your job or you play golf with the person or you've met them at a church group or something and you recommend.
Yes.
So now you've done a favor for that person that you just met because you took the time to ask the person about themselves and about their problems. So then you were able to offer a solution.
Yeah.
And if people are networking properly, you'll get the chance to talk about you, but you don't want to walk up to someone, shake hands, and then start talking about yourself. That's a huge turnoff. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's not immoral. You're not stealing from people. You're giving.
I hear you. I hear you so much. And I'm thinking of how can women then, and I'm certainly, you work with a lot of women, and you know, there's many stories in the book about women and some of the things that the challenges that they have. But how do women learn that this golf thing is part of networking? It isn't just a, I mean, I'm not a golfer. I wonder if I was in business, if I would be smart enough to go golfing and learn, because business is done on the golf course itself also. I mean, that's part of the networking, right?
Absolutely.
And all the leaders golf. So all of the up and coming people in the company want to learn golf so they can go. So women should do that also. But what is your advice to women who are reluctant to do these things, who still kind of cling to that old, well, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't have anything to offer. I can't contribute. So why would I do it? What do you say to those women?
Well, that's very interesting because it's kind of based on, as you said, old stereotypes and also a limiting belief. So my advice is first, we have to work on your limiting beliefs so that you're more open to doing some of these things. And it takes some confidence also to do that.
Right.
And I mean, I've been at networking events where women come and people that I wanted to speak with, and they were standing on the sidelines by themselves. Two women, I remember that one distinctly. I had a coffee once, So my advice is, and I went over to them, I said, where did you come from and how did you hear about this? And why don't you join in? Make sure you get a donut. And they just kind of didn't want to mix in. And my advice is go to these things. Don't be afraid. If you don't want to learn golf, there's lots of other opportunities. Men, for instance, have a lot of church organizations that they belong to.
Oh.
And there's a lot of other social groups that now are open to both men and women, like the Elks Club and some of these other Rotary. And those groups all do charitable works. I joined the Women's Club, and yes, that's a number of women. However, they do a lot of charitable works that involve meeting other men in business because they have to ask for money for these charities. They collect coats and they have to distribute them to an agency, which probably has men somewhere in a leadership position. So you just have to break out and not feel shy. And I know it's tough, but it's kind of like swallowing a pill. You can, if you feel comfortable just showing up and standing in a corner like these two gals I mentioned earlier.
Well, why even come if that's what you're going to do?
Well, just to get comfortable. It's like aversion therapy. It's like an allergist giving you a little bit of bee venom to help you not be allergic to bees.
Right.
And so I like to compare it to that. So that lack of networking and lack of being in a community that's mixed, men and women, and all types of people, not just men and women, but all races, all stripes, everybody. You have to mix and mingle and not stay so secluded and not be afraid. So if you have fear, just show up, bring a friend, maybe, I've done this, drag your husband along. So, and you watch what the husband does when he gets there. He's gone. He's mixing in. He's getting his coffee. He's chatting it up. If I had a cocktail hour one time, he was over there chatting it up with the bartender.
Right.
So men seem to think, hey, this is my chance. Maybe he wanted to use that bartender some other time. Maybe the bartender, because he was all over the place as a freelance bartender, maybe he knew somebody that could help me or help him. So it's always about, if you want to build your business and your career, you have to mingle and you have to take advantage of your network. And if you think you don't have a network, go back to what I said earlier about the 250 people that would come to your funeral.
Wow.
That's your network.
Wow.
And start leveraging that network. And that's my advice. If you're afraid, do it anyway.
Yes, do it anyway. And sometimes I know in the early days when I became an entrepreneur, I was terrified, Mary. It was like, I'm an introvert. Why do I have to go out and talk to these people? But I knew I had to do it. And so I went out and I did a lot of listening, and where I could contribute something I did. And to your point, I brought Tom with me.
Yeah.
And Tom is like, he has no trouble talking to anybody on the street. He'll talk for 20 minutes to someone he just met. And I did what you said. I watched sometimes and I thought, well, I need to learn how to be a little more relaxed and not to feel, here's a big thing, not to feel that I was imposing, because everyone is there to network.
Exactly.
That's something you need to remember, right?
Exactly.
So before we go, we're getting to the end. This is really great talk. Let's talk a little bit about how much fun it was to write the book. Because it was hard work, wasn't it, Mary?
It was very hard work, but it was well worth it. I think you probably saw that caricature, that emoji or bitmoji that I put up that showed the woman with the laptop and the papers going all over the place. And the caption was, "I'm writing a book." And that's exactly the way I felt. It was stressful, But looking back on it, I read this book, 272 pages. Like, how did I do that? Right?
Yeah.
I read this book, and sometimes I can't believe that I actually wrote these words, because to be honest with you, this book, for a first self-published book, and I guess I am bragging, it's really well written. And I had a number of people tell me that. I'm trying to think of exactly who they were, but I've had people tell me that they were reluctant to read it because they thought it was going to be a bunch of fluff. But when they got into it, they realized that it was very much of substance.
Oh,
And
yeah, it's solid.
as I was reading through this book, I didn't see one false note or one place where it was not well supported, what my theories were or my observations were. They were all supported by research. And that comes from my background and my training, which is very academic. So, and as you know, these essays that I wrote were all standalone papers and essays that were written for my master's degree and some for my coaching certificate. And so the work was, and thanks to you and Tom, I was able to conquer this, but the work was in transposing academic work into a narrative that meant something, that had connection.
Right.
All of the stories are relatable, but they had to have a through line, as you say. And, you know, you did to me what I do to my clients is like, what do you really want to say here?
Right.
Why are you writing this book? And you pulled it out of me what my idea was. That first I thought, well, leaders don't lead. Well, what's the reason for that? And the reason is they don't know how to behave. Their
Right,
behavior is
exactly.
despicable. I could,
Exactly.
you know, I could write another whole book on just that, on the things that I observed that were, you know, borderline illegal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Mary, this was a really outstanding effort. Now tell us that you have something else that just recently came out.
Yes, absolutely. And I do not have a copy of it yet. I have
Well,
not
I
reviewed
did,
it.
but it's down in Tom's office. I should have brought it up, but it's the field guide, folks.
Yes.
So it looks very similar to this, but it's a workbook. And talk about the workbook a little bit, Mary, because I think it's important. I want people to understand that when you write a book, it becomes more than just something people read and put on a shelf.
Exactly. In particular, this book, because
Mhm.
it is a learning book. There is a great deal of learning involved in this book. That was part of what the purpose of each one of these essays was to point out a mistake that somebody made and then not just complain about it, but say, you know, this is what the behavior should have been in that situation.
Yeah.
So what I did with the workbook, and I thought that was going to be easy to put together, but it was not. It took me a long time to write questions for those 25 chapters.
Yeah.
And so what the workbook does is it gives people a practical application for what they found in the book, because you can read a book and say, okay, so that's her idea of how to solve it, but I don't know if it's going to work for me.
Exactly.
So when you pick up the book, the questions in the field guide are, you know, how does this impact this issue, whatever it is? How are women treated in your organization? And what would you suggest your organization do about it? What would you like to see happen? And I do that on every single chapter. I had to be careful because I have a teaching background. I taught high school English for 10 years. And so when I started it off, it was very much, you know, what did you read this part, and what did this person do in this situation? And I realized that was totally not the emphasis. The emphasis was to be on the individual reading the book and what they got out of the book for themselves.
Right.
It's all about what you learned after reading the book.
Yep. So and folks, so you can get Mary's book on Mary's website. Mary, tell us where they can get your book. I mean, everybody knows Amazon. Things are on
It's
Amazon.
on
Tell us.
Amazon, but it's also on my website
Yep.
at Visionary Leader Book, all one phrase, .com. So it's visionaryleaderbook.com.
Excellent, excellent. And I will have that in the notes and in the blog post and everything, so people can click on it and get this book and the field guide workbook also. And Mary, you also do workshops. So this
Yes.
wasn't just something, again, folks, Mary didn't just write this book so she could say, wow, now I got that off my chest. No, Mary coaches. Tell us about your coaching, Mary.
Right. So after I left corporate America, and I can't say it was all bad because they helped me pay for coaching school and they paid for half of my master's degree.
Right.
So my theory is, you know, if you're unhappy at work and you work for a big company, remember they have deep pockets. So take advantage of everything you can for free, which I did. It was kind of like a little revenge thing. But in my coaching work, actually some of the stories came from coaching. I work with individuals to help them develop their leadership skills. And basically, you know, we address behavior, but I conduct workshops with the book and the workbook together. I can do them on any level. I can do a half-hour quickie workshop on, you know, some of the ideas. I can do an hour. And actually today I was thinking this should really be a 3-day workshop. Yeah, and well, I can do it in-house or I can do a public workshop.
Right.
However people want it done. I can do full days, half days, once a week, however they want it done. I'm very open and flexible, and my pricing is right up there with everybody else's. I don't overcharge or undercharge.
Right. Your goal has always been, as you said earlier when we were talking about the networking, is to give back. It isn't to try and become rich and famous.
Right.
But you could become rich and famous because that's how good this book is, folks. And Mary, we're at the end of the show at this point. I can't thank you enough for letting me help you create this book, but you deserve so many of the kudos because you did the hard work of not just the writing, which was really hard, but bringing those experiences, that knowledge that you had to be able to put it in a book and now a workbook and to be able to create workshops, because people need to learn this stuff.
Exactly.
I mean,
if they want to be successful and happy,
yeah,
which is what everybody wants.
Yep.
So get right down to it in coaching. And I ask people, what do they really want? It's always, I want to be happy.
Yep. Yep. And you talk about it in the book. So folks, once again, you can see Mary's background. Here's the book. It will be in the notes. Mary, maybe we'll do this again because there's still so much of the book that we couldn't cover and so much that we could talk about. I can't thank you enough for being on Smart Conversations.
You're very welcome.
And this is Yvonne DeVita signing off for now and from downtown sunny Binghamton. See you next time around.